Hey, it's Ed here. I want to talk about childhood trauma. They call it ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience. And there's been a lot of studies done on this in large studies, 16,000 people, with the CDC and Kaiser Permanente several years ago. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I saw a news story this morning that talked about the things that teens and adolescents are going through today, and they're much different than what you and I went through. Imagine what the pressure that they're feeling to perform on social media 24/7. You and I, or at least I, only had to perform when we were standing in front of our friends or walking down the hallway in the classroom or the school. But they are under a microscope 24/7. And they're feeling the pressure. They have to perform. Every photo or everything that they post is scrutinized, judged, commented on, and criticized. And there was a girl that I saw a video she posted on YouTube that she was crying hysterically because her Instagram account had been disabled because she got too many complaints. And she was begging people not to complain about her Instagram. She says, "You don't understand. I live in LA. This is who I am. This is me. I'm not a 9-to-5 person. I'm making my living this way." And I thought, oh my God, this is horrible that she really believes this. And I believe that she truly feels that way. And I mean, her tears were genuine. She was traumatized. Now, is that made up trauma? Is that real life trauma? I'm not here to judge that, but think about this. I have my friend Mr. Wolf behind me here, and there's an Indian story that talks about the two wolves that rage inside of us. And he was telling this story to a young man, and he was saying, "My son, there's two wolves that rage inside of us. One is evil. He is angry. He is envious, sorrow, regretful, greed. He represents arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other one is all that's good in us. He represents love, joy, peace, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence. He's the empathetic part of us. He's generous. He's truth, compassion, and of course faithful." And the same fight goes on within all of us. We have two wolves raging inside of us. And the young man asked at the end of the story, he says, "Well, who wins this battle?" And the chief says, "My son, it's the one that you feed." And the reason I bring that up is, I heard this story many times throughout my life, but I really didn't give it much thought. But several years ago, I went through a program called Celebrate Recovery, and it's really great to, it digs inside of you, because, see, my childhood was not a good one. And many people think that, you see someone walking down the street and they think, "Oh boy, that person has it great." Because from all outward appearances, I had a great childhood. But see, I was born in Leadville, Colorado, the 2 Mile High city. And my dad was a miner, worked for Climax Mine, and he thought that was the last job he was going to ever have. Well, he got laid off. They laid off 2,500 miners, and he was one of those. And he'd been there 15 years, and he figured that's his career. Well, there was no more mines around there, so we ended up moving to North Idaho, where there was lots of mines. Well, and they ended up buying a bar, and we lived in the bar. We lived upstairs in the bar, while my dad worked in the mines, and then both of them tended bar. But the downside is that they drank. They drank all the time. Morning, noon, and night, they were drinking. They had a beer in front of them, whether they were, working behind the bar or not. My dad ended up quitting the mines and running a bar with my mom full time, and drinking got worse, and there was a lot of fights in that bar because it was a fairly rough crowd. It was miners and loggers, and we're in North Idaho. I mean, that's what people do around here. Is, they fish and hunt and ski and snowmobile and get in fights. Well, there's a lot of fights, especially when people are drinking and drinking too much, whether it's fighting over a woman or somebody cheated on the pool game. And it wasn't uncommon for me to come downstairs in the morning and hear a 10, 11-year-old kid coming downstairs and finding the bar just trashed. Because usually I got up for my parents because they were too hungover, because they were up till 2 o'clock in the morning drinking and tending the bar. And I'd find, pool cues broken, and a napkin holder was smashed one morning, and apparently somebody got that napkin holder upside their head. Well, one morning I came down, and there was a bar stool that was smashed. And I remember this bar stool like it was yesterday. It had black painted legs with the paint chipped off of them. But this bar stool was smashed to pieces in the kitchen. And it was like kindling. And I remember it just like it was yesterday. And this is, 45 years ago? And, this wasn't a fight. This was my dad. My dad was angry, and he took it out on that bar stool, which was probably better than the alternative. But I also got to see my dad drinking all the time. You see, inside of the kitchen, just inside the two swinging doors coming out from the bar, there was a cabinet there which had the hard liquor. And walk in the kitchen and see my dad take a shot of whiskey, several times a day. And that seemed normal. Does that seem normal to you? Well, it doesn't now. But back then, that was my life. That was what normal was. Well, one night, 2 o'clock in the morning, my parents got in a big fight. And in the winter, we all slept in the same room upstairs because it was like a big barn up there. And they would close off half of it and only heat half of it so we could all keep warm. And I remember it was like yesterday. And I don't remember what my mom got us arguing about, or my mom and dad were arguing about, but she got me involved. And I ended up laughing at my dad. And my dad went silent. Well, I drifted off to sleep and never gave it another thought, or so I thought. But 2 days later, my dad attempted suicide for the first time. You see, he pulled over on a deserted road, took a hose, put it to the exhaust and in the car window, and started the car. And if it wasn't for a stranger coming along and finding him and saving his life, he would have died that night. About 3, 4, 5 months later, I don't remember exactly, he did it again. Pulled off side of the road, put a hose in the window. Same scenario. A perfect stranger happened to come along, said, "Wow, that looks strange," and rescued him. Well, this time they hauled him off to the psychiatric ward in Medical Lake, Washington. And he spent 6 months there getting evaluated, and all the demons that were inside of him. You see, he had a lot of demons. He grew up in a very volatile household in rural Montana, and his dad was an alcoholic, and his dad used to beat his mom. And one day he said, "I've had enough, and if he comes home drunk, he's dead." He got his rifle, and he describes this rifle as a beat-up old rifle with a broken stock, and climbs up on the rocks above the house and waited for his dad. And he said to himself, if he comes home drunk tonight, he's dead. Fortunately, his dad came home that night stone cold sober. Never so much as stubbed his toe. But my dad was 13 at the time, and he decided that he had to leave, or something bad was going to happen. So he packed his belongings without telling anybody. He left. And he never saw his dad again. Well, he lied and enlisted into the Navy when he was 17. And he came home from boot camp and went into the restaurant where his mom was and sat down, and she walked over and to take his order and said, "Yes, what do you want?" He goes, "You don't know who I am, do you?" She goes, yeah, you're Floyd. You're my son. Can you imagine how much that hurt? No. Where have you been? I love you. Nothing. He ordered his meal, paid for it, and left. And he didn't see his mom for another 30 years, probably. Maybe. I don't know how long it really was. When she came to visit us at the bar, and she was a mean woman. So, back to my dad getting out of the medical lake because he's dealing with his demons, his trauma, his adverse childhood experiences. Comes home, and my mom and dad were going to AA, they called it the 12 and 12 club, and we were on welfare because they'd sold the bar, and my dad was disabled, and my mom wasn't working, so we lived on welfare. And I remember my mom taking me to get what I called welfare shoes. Black, shiny dress shoes. I'm 13. How many 13-year-olds are going to wear black, shiny dress shoes? I wasn't going to. I'm going to go and have everybody make fun of me, so I wore my old worn-out tennis shoes that I'd been wearing. They were too small, but I wasn't going to wear those black shoes to school. Fast forward, I don't know, 6-8 months, maybe a year. Middle of the night, there's lights flashing in the house. 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I come downstairs and I find my dad laying on the couch with his hunting rifle across his chest, with the barrel pointed under his chin and his big toe strumming that trigger. Cops and paramedics are surrounding my dad, and they're trying to get this rifle away from my dad before he does something horrible. And, I'm standing there and I'm like, I'm invisible. Nobody even acknowledges that I'm there. Well, they finally get the rifle away from him, off to Medical Lake again for, another 6-8 months. And so that was my early teens. By the time I was 14, I was working full-time during the summer, making $1.75 an hour working for a guy who owned a hardware store. And by the time I was 16, I was working full-time, or at least 32 hours a week at a Safeway. I was a box boy, and then I became a cashier and checker, and all through high school, I worked full-time. By the time I was 16, I had bought my own car. Paid $300 for a '67 Impala convertible. It was a giant boat. But it was cool because it was a convertible. And it would hold about 50 people. I had that car for about 6 months, and then I traded it for a 1966 Mustang with a 289 high performance. And that thing was fast. It was pretty ugly. But I painted it, cleaned it up, hot rod, wide tires, and I broke just about every part on that car because I was hot rodding it all the time. So you can imagine a 16-year-old kid with this wolf raging inside of him. The one with anger? Well, that was me. Well, that's when I started drinking, and 16-year-old drinking, it's not a good combination. Amazingly, I survived that. Fast forward, by the time I was 18, I think it was about 3 days after I was 18, I moved out on my own. I hadn't even graduated from high school, and I had my own apartment. And matter of fact, our graduation party was at 2 locations. One was at my apartment, and the other was somewhere across town. And there was probably 50, 60 people that came and went out of my little one-bedroom apartment that night. But we had a blast, and the apartment manager got a lot of complaints. Well, I walked him out in the parking lot and talked to him, and told him, yeah, we'll calm it down, we'll get everybody out of here. And I had a fifth of R&R whiskey in my hand, and I shared it with him, and when he went to hand it back, I said, no, you keep it. Well, that was the last we heard of him, and the party went on till, middle of the night. So that's how my teen years started. And I started college. I went to Spokane Falls Community College. Got a degree in photography. They had a 3-year program. And so I was going to be a famous photographer. Well, I was neither lucky or that good. So I ended up going back to school, getting a degree in electronics from a trade school. So I continued and, writing software, repairing circuit boards, diagnosing computer systems. First computer I saw was a giant compact luggable, if you've ever seen one of those. And from there, I was recruited right before I even graduated from technical college with my degree in electronics. I was recruited to go to work for a photo processing company. And my first job was in Alaska. And when they offered me the position, the guy said, well, we have 3 openings. We have one in Seattle, one in Montana, and one in Alaska. And we're going to hire for all 3 of those. And you get first choice. And I chose Alaska. He goes, no, you get first choice. Well, I'd been to Alaska, so I thought it was great. So I traveled all over rural Alaska and all the time feeding one of those wolves. So I ended up going from Alaska to California, and in California I ended up meeting my wife, who became my wife. She ran a technical college, and I was hiring people from her, and got married when I was 28. Adopted my son when he was 3 days old, and shortly after that I virtually became a single parent. And because my ex-wife was not equipped to be a parent, I'll say it politely. And so I was working full-time. I was in a very competitive environment. I was in the software consulting industry, and I was virtually racing up and down the freeway in Los Angeles, spending 6-7 hours a day driving and racing back to pick up my son from school, and so the pressure was immense. Here I was in a high-pressure industry, single parent, even though my ex-wife still lived in the house for part of that time. There was a lot of pressure. For the last 4 years, she, before we were divorced, we were married for 18 years, she wasn't at the house most of the time. I really don't even know where she was. She would just disappear for long periods of time and show back up every once in a while, but I was okay with that because I was the parent and I was managing just fine. Well, then the economy collapsed. About the same time I got a divorce. And in the divorce, because she had never worked or hadn't worked in 15 plus years, I pretty much lost everything. Had to sell the house. She got all the profits from the house. I had to pay her a lot of money. But the industry I was in, I felt I was okay. But with that economy collapsing, the first thing they cut out is software consulting. And any custom software. My customers were, Hyundai Motors, Honda, Kia, Sony Electronics, Deloitte and Touche. So I had some pretty big clients. But when the economy collapsed, there were no more consulting, and I was a high-paid commission sales consultant. So wasn't making a living, and the condo that I rented was $2,300 a month, and I was paying $5 a gallon for gas, and I was driving a Hummer H3, got 14 miles to the gallon. And so finally I decided that I needed to get out of California. And so I moved back to North Idaho. And I'd been dating a woman for a while, and I told her, I said, I'm leaving, I'm moving to Idaho, and she said, well, Idaho's not on my radar, goodbye. And but I worked really hard, and I talked her into moving to Idaho. And 7 months after I moved here, she followed. And shortly after that, my nephew died of a drug overdose. It's a little over 7 years ago. And I said to her at the time, I said, I do not want to end up like him. He was 38 years old, died of a drug overdose. What I haven't told you yet is my brother died at age 37 from a drug overdose. Because of his ACEs, because of his wolf that he was dealing with, the same wolf that was attacking my nephew, the same wolf that I was living with, that evil wolf, because I was feeding the wrong one. And so I said to her, I said, I don't want to end up like them. She goes, well, you're headed down the wrong path, because with everything you're dealing with, you're drinking too much. So I went to that Celebrate Recovery program that I talked about, and I identified what I was dealing with. And remember that 10-year-old boy who laughed at his dad because his dad and mom were fighting? The dad who attempted suicide 3 times? I blamed myself. I was a 10-year-old boy, but I carried that for 45 years. I was blaming myself for 40 years. I was blaming myself for the issues that my dad was struggling with. It wasn't my wolf, but I took it on. The childhood experience I was carrying with me was the trauma that I dealt with. Now you could call it PTSD, you could call it whatever you want, but it was the demons that I was dealing with that was causing me to struggle. And imagine the demons that our children are dealing with. Imagine the wolves, the battles that's raging inside of the children that are walking around us today, the teens, the adolescents. We don't even know what they're struggling with. But what we do need to do is we need to take the time to understand what's going on with them, because teen suicide is at a record high. Teen drug use is at a record high. Alcohol use has continued to climb. Because they're self-medicating because of what they're dealing with inside. We need to help them understand that. We need to understand what they're dealing with so we can help them deal with it. Because we don't want teens to grow up with blaming themselves for the same things that I blamed myself for. You see, my brother didn't survive that. My nephew didn't survive that. I was fortunate that I survived it. We all grew up in an alcoholic, abusive environment. Because you see, my sister married an alcoholic. So my niece and my nephew, they got to experience the same environment that I grew up in, that my sister grew up in. But my sister escaped, or so we thought. She just moved to a new abusive, alcoholic environment. And now, there's only me and my sister left. And I'm sure my sister is dealing with the same wolves that I was dealing with. Fortunately, I found a way to deal with them. I went through a Celebrate Recovery. I ended up leading recovery groups. I went through the whole training. I started a Celebrate Recovery outside of the church. And my wife and I, who started helping me run recovery groups, and we got to see a lot of the trauma. The things that people tell you in an environment that is safe would horrify most people. We had, at one point we had on Monday nights, 28 people coming for dinner, our fellowship group. On Thursdays we had, the highest I think we had was 3 groups of 8 or 9 people at a time. So every Thursday we had 3 groups of 8 or 10 people meeting. And I still am really close with a lot of those, even though we shut down our recovery group a little over a year ago. I'm still really close with a lot of those people, and I get to see the progress that they've made. But I also know the demons that they fought during that time. So there is hope for our teens, but it's easier to help our teens early than try to help the adult of that child who has been hurting. So what we need to do is start focusing on our teenagers and figure out what they're struggling with and identify those struggles before it's too late, before they become adults, or before they do something that will regret, because suicide is permanent. Addiction is not. I posted something the other day that addiction doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're hurting. And most people see it that an addict is someone who is weak, someone who is broken. And they may have some broken pieces, but addiction is that they're broken. I mean, addiction isn't that they're broken, it means that they're hurting. And we need to help them understand what they're hurting from. Whether it's like me, that 10-year-old boy who's blamed himself for 40 years for his father's demons, which weren't mine to own. We need to help them feed the right wolf, the one that is kind, gentle, truthful, and honest, and peaceful, and joyful. You look in the eyes of a child today, do you see joy? If you can get them to look at you, with their device like this, that's how they communicate. So I want you to join me and it's only you and I who can make that difference. So if you want to be part of this, or if you're struggling, send me a message on this stream. My email address is ed@liferecoverysolution.com, or you can find our website, which is liferecoverysolution.com. There's a lot of resources available out there. Most of us don't know where they are. Most of us don't know how to find them. Most of us are ashamed to even go look for them or admit that we're hurting. Remember, we're hurting, not broken. So send me a message, leave me a comment at the under this video. I would love to hear from all of you, and let's help each other. Together we can fight this battle. Apart we cannot. Have a great day.